All right, so we're going to get started with the next panel, which is navigating a path from campus to career. This panel is broken up into two parts, which you'll see in the agenda for today. The first part will be before lunch. The second part will be after lunch. My name is Meg Sparling. I'm on the Graduate Advisory Committee for Humanists Work. And I was working on this panel with three other members of our committee. I am a PhD candidate in English at UC Davis. So for the first half of this panel, the four of us from the committee will talk to you about a project that we've been working on that we're really excited about, but has been very eye-opening. The project has two components that we've been working on: a snapshot that we each created of our 4 campuses, professionalization resources, and 2, a survey that we administered to our fellow graduate students and postdocs at our campuses that had them evaluate their resources on campus, the climate on their campus surrounding professionalization, and their plans, their own particular individual plans, and the feelings that they had about this issue. So at your tables, you will find 2 printed copies of each of our materials that we created, a snapshot of our campus's resources, and then for some of us, we also included some survey data in that as well. And then also at the tables are flash drives that have all of those materials in a folder that's named Navigating a Path, the panel title. So for those of you who have laptops, if you would be willing to download those materials so that you can look at those and then others can look at the handouts. We really want to get you to familiarize yourself with these materials a little bit, because after lunch, in the second half of the panel, we're really going to be diving into those handouts, those resources, and talking about them in small groups and then also all together. So without further ado, we're going to start with Dory Perez from UC Merced.
Hi there, I'm Dory Perez. I'm from Merced, and I'm so happy to be back in this space. Okay, so I'm in the Interdisciplinary Humanities program. We are very new, as is UC Merced in general. We've been there since the beginning, since 2006, but in a very different form. Most of that time was the multidisciplinary World Cultures graduate program. And as it developed 2 years ago, there was a switch to the Interdisciplinary Humanities graduate program, which had a much more cohesive coursework and kind of pedagogical practice. So this is a rather abrupt switch in the last 2 years. And so we currently have graduate students who are in both programs, the one that's being phased out and the one that's currently moving forward. So in terms of kind of the infrastructure of the program, we are, of course, in a growth year, in a growth decade, actually. We have a new, or fairly new graduate dean. We have a new dean of the College of Social Science, Humanities, and Arts. We have a new department chair, and our department chair who shepherded the program shift from World Cultures to Interdisciplinary Humanities is leaving us this year. So there is a lot of anxiety about institutional memory and kind of that history and kind of movement forward as a graduate group. But most of the programmatic development for career happens through our Center for Humanities on campus. There is a shift to move some of that more to the department's auspices, but historically that has really been part of the Center for Humanities on campus. Okay, so I am presenting a rather truncated version of our collective survey. Simultaneous to my own survey, there was a graduate advising survey about climate that unfortunately I did not get access to because it was meant for the faculty advising committee. I put together something that really had to do with what graduate students wanted in terms of gaps in infrastructure. So here you can see that there was a desire for spaces like this, where we get to see ALTAC professionals in their domain and kind of get to know kind of the diversity of what's available to humanities PhD. Largely, there is kind of a cleavage in the group, as you can imagine, a graduate group with two distinct programs. Some people want a more disciplinary specific program, which is a ship that has kind of sailed but lingers collectively in our consciousness. And other graduate students expressed a desire to just see spaces, again, like this, where alternative and diverse careers are being presented in a positive, uplifting way that doesn't quite have that weight of what we've been talking about earlier. And so this is a map that I put together. Nothing really has been created that's cohesive, that really kind of maps out, you know, a humanities PhD's experience on campus. So I tried to gather some disparate parts. As you can see, the programming happens through the Center for Humanities, but that's shifting. We have funding through the department. And then in the graduate division, graduate dean's department, there's kind of a larger discussion about professionalization, which includes the dissertation boot camps and kind of these summer bridge programs that help get people to our campus. So that's UC Merced.
Good afternoon. My name is Olivia, and I'm here to share my snapshot of UC San Diego with you. So I'm coming to you from the Ethnic Studies Department. I'm a fourth year there, and so I've put a little blurb about our department that's on the website. And as you can see, it's a social justice-oriented research program. And on the right-hand side, I kind of gave a snapshot of what that looks like in my fourth year. So what a fourth-year PhD student at UC San Diego is actually doing that's outside of the academy. So I'm doing some internships, paid and unpaid, trying to get training that's supplementing the PhD. So I like to call those my side hustles. But the more that I think about it, the PhD becomes kind of my side hustle because of the training that I know I'm interested in and what's actually provided in my curriculum, right, in the Ethnic Studies program. So something I want to point out for Ethnic Studies, the alumni tracking, we do track alumni, but there were only 3 non-academic placements that were tracked. And one was a high school high school teacher, one was an archivist for the UC Irvine libraries, and one was a center developer for Azusa Pacific University, so also kind of alongside the academy. And so I, challenge you all to look at your alumni tracking, and I know that's something that Work is very invested in, is how do we track alumni that are placed outside of academia, and how do we get folks to, come back and share that information with their program so that that's available to all of us. So this is kind of a macro view. It's not an exhaustive list of resources that are available at UC San Diego, but this is kind of the core resources that I have access to and ones that I think are really powerful. So we have GrAdvantage, Career Services Center, Graduate Writing Center, which is now offering graduate writing services for graduate students, and I know that wasn't the case in the past, so that's been really helpful. And then the Questioning Career Transition Group, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about, and then the Teaching and Learning Commons. And there's a breakdown of the resources on your tables as well. So GrAdvantage is a collaboration between the Graduate Division, GSA, and Career Services Center. And so this is more of leadership development training, communication skills training. And they offer more of the, traditional alt-ac workshops, so like how to transfer your CV to a resume and all of that good stuff, a lot of online tools and workshops. And so something that I participated in and that I think is really valuable as a model for how to think about what Humanists at Work kind of intellectual work looks like on campus is the Questioning Career Transition Group. So it's a 5-week series and it's a collaboration between our counseling services on campus and also a collaboration with our Career Services Center. So it's, I think we met twice a week, right? And it really helps students walk through that decision-making process of pursuing a career outside of academia, and also the value assessment that goes along with that. So it helps students really visualize what that looks like for the individual path. And that's a quote from somebody who's gone through the program. And I think that this, when we're talking about speaking to the PhD as a whole person, like this really does that. This kind of format where you're collaborating counseling services, collaborating career advising. And so something else that's put on through GrAdvantage is inspiring research, creative strategies for communication. And so this is an intensive 4-day workshop. I also participated in this, and I was exhausted by the end. My feet hurt. You become embodied in the research in this process. And at the surface, I think it definitely helps students articulate their research interests and articulate their research across disciplines. So you're in a group with folks from STEM and humanities and departments all over campus. But I think at the core, it helps you really evaluate why you're in that program in the first place, why you became interested in the work that you started, right? And so I think, again, at the core, that's what the homework is invested in, right? How do we make that translatable? And then they also give you a professional setup. They invite a professional journalist to come in and you do an interview style. And it's really nerve-wracking, but it's really useful professional development, right? And that's the first time I've ever had that experience. So I found that really useful. And so the survey snapshot that I did, sorry about that. So you have the actual responses on your tables, and this is kind of some highlights that came from the surveys. So students felt that they felt lowest support from their department and from UC San Diego as a whole, but the highest support from peers. And I know that's also generated from other campus surveys as well. There's also a need for mentors and advisors who are knowledgeable about career paths and know how to advise students who have those interests. So beyond just support or like a pat on the back, but actually give us some direction to support us. And what else? So students want one-on-one career advisor consultations, but that's department specific, right? So I think that we have a lot of good career advising services on campus, but folks don't feel connected to access those resources, and they don't feel that it's necessarily tailored to the advising that they need. And so I'm going to leave you with some quotes from the surveys, and I challenge you to think about, if we are going to pursue these kinds of recommendations, what are the next steps for doing so? And for the career professionals in the room, like how do we go about that, incorporating these recommendations into the kinds of programming proposals that you all are so invested in? So we should have public scholarship certificates facilitated by the Center for Humanities and Graduate Studies. The next one talks about the possibilities of the degree, right? So folks want to feel like they have more options. And I think that really speaks to enriching the value of the degree program. And then something that also came up as a theme is workshops for mentors and advisors, right? So switching the focus not only for mentorship for students, but faculties, right? How do we enrich that process? And that's all for now. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to talk about UC Davis really quickly. So first I will reference, so in the handout, mine is the light green one. The first page is the general snapshot that I created for all of our campus resources, or the majority of our campus resources surrounding graduate student professionalization in the humanities and humanistic social sciences. This is a representation of the primary resources, and then there's a little bit more detail on that sheet in front of you. So we have actually a pretty good system in place at UC Davis in terms of, like, we have a lot of resources, or a lot more than other campuses might have, but they're a little separated, and they don't often work in tandem. There's a lot of overlap in programming, particularly between the Office of Graduate Studies and the Internship and Career Center, who kind of actually do work in tandem, and then places like the DHI, which I'm going to talk about in a second, the Davis Humanities Institute, which kind of picks up what is not gone over in terms of like humanities specific or humanistic social sciences specific. Office of Grad Studies and the Internship and Career Center kind of have to cover everything. And then we also have the Center for Educational Effectiveness, which is teaching professionalization, and then individual grad programs I'm from the English department. We have some, but not very many events, but it kind of varies by department. But I'm going to talk about the Davis Humanities Institute really quickly because the Humanities Institute at Davis is pretty strong. They have really robust programming, and they're kind of an amazing resource on our campus for humanities and humanistic social science PhDs and postdocs and master's students. My slides are really text heavy, I apologize. I'm going to breeze through them, but the DHI has an amazing website that you can go on and really familiarize yourself with all of their programs. It's dhi.ucdavis.edu. So the Humanities Institute is really connected to a lot of partners across the country and then also within the UC system. They, in addition to all of these different programs that they have for faculty and graduate students supporting their research, they also have two primary programs for professionalization regarding graduate students. We have the PhD Unlimited series, which has been running for a few years now, a couple years. And this is basically a year-long series of speakers, workshops, and other events that are programming for, specifically geared toward humanists and humanistic social sciences, scientists regarding professionalization. And then also they have the Mellon Public Scholars program as of last year. This was funded by the Mellon Foundation, and it's a spring through summer research program that introduces graduate students to the intellectual and practical aspects of public humanities and engaged scholarship. We actually have 2 Mellon Public Scholars Fellows from UC Davis here, and then I'm told that we have a third one from another campus as well. Simon and Stephanie, can you raise your hands? So if you're interested in this program, it's an amazing program. You can talk to these guys, and they'll tell you all about it. So that is that one. And then the DHI also offers a variety of other ways of helping graduate students with their professionalization. They also employ graduate students, myself and Stephanie included, which is an amazing experience for gaining skills. So to transition to the survey, I conducted my survey about 2 weeks ago, or maybe I guess it was about a week ago, and I emailed almost 900 of my fellow graduate students and got about 11% of them to respond. So you'll see from my handout, I just gave you like almost all the data that I gathered from that. And you can kind of work your way through it, maybe even through lunch or something, and then we'll talk about it later. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the most important things that I noticed from the survey. So familiarity with resources. The majority of my fellow graduate students feel either somewhat familiar or unfamiliar with the resources, even though we have so many, and they're actually constantly being bombarded with emails about them all the time. Even through that, they just really don't know what's available to them, or they feel kind of like it's not geared towards them enough for it to make sense for them to take advantage of it. Another another number that actually really surprised me, but based maybe perhaps on my own personal feelings about this issue, was that almost 70% of the respondents were still planning on pursuing a tenure track job. And you'll see for those of you who kind of walk through the narrative responses in my handout for people actually expressing what they want, a vast majority of them want more programming about tenure track job professionalization, not just alt-ac. It's almost, I feel like at Davis, it's almost gotten to the point where we have more resources for alt-ac and non-ac than we do for tenure track, and it's becoming an issue. So there's also the question of where you feel support. At Davis, it's kind of evenly split between whether they feel supported by the department or whether they don't. Slightly more of them feel unsupported by their department. The institution, they feel slightly more supports them than they feel doesn't support them. But then you'll see from here that most of them really feel like they still get their support from their peers. And then finally, one of the things that we're going to talk about after lunch in the second half of the panel is you'll see from this, the thing that stands out to me the most is that the resources that they really, really want are resources that would be coming within their graduate programs and departments. They express this in the narrative responses as well, that the stuff that's coming through the Career Center and through grad studies, it's okay, but it doesn't connect with them in the way that something within their own graduate programs would connect with them. So that's something that I feel is really important to highlight. And I'll turn it over to Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica. I've been up here too much already, but I'm a PhD candidate in history at Berkeley. And I'm going to quickly walk you through the kind of what I called this morning the graduate professional development landscape, but I now realize that's kind of a controversial topic or word. I compiled this presentation and the snapshot at your desk in 2 ways. I consulted a number of the units and people behind a variety of efforts at Berkeley to kind of broaden what humanist PhDs think that they can do with their careers. And then also, there's a new office of graduate professional development at our graduate division that has like a resource map in progress right now that I drew upon as well. Based on my research, I felt like most of what I called the graduate professional development resources are kind of focused in these 5 areas. Mentoring and teaching. By this, I'm referring to the certification programs, the trainings, the seminars, the workshops that are based on cultivating graduate students' capacities to mentor and teach both within and beyond the university. More recently, there's been workshops based on like, what are the transferable skills of teaching? How can you do this beyond a 4-year university context? Tech. I'm thinking of the workshops, the grants, the fellowships, the designated emphases that are trying to help humanists develop digital literacy, whether that be learning a new programming language in Berkeley's data lab, reinforcing your facility with Microsoft Office, or thinking about how to deploy digital tools within the classroom. Career exploration. Beyond academia, the Career Center one-on-one sessions, a number of professional and personality self-assessment exams that are kind of geared at helping humanities PhDs answer the question of not just what I can do with a PhD beyond become a professor, but what I want to do, what's in line with my values, my interests, my strengths. The 4th category is what I kind of think of as like the presentation of your professional self beyond the academy. Our Career Center in particular has offered a number of resources on this. How do you translate your CV into a resume, but also how do you talk about what you've been doing the past 6, 7, 10 years in a way that is legible to like your family, but also more importantly, perhaps your next boss. And then finally, writing in communications to a non-academic audience. So there are increasingly opportunities for employment on the university in side hustles, I suppose, that enable you to talk about your research in a way that's geared at a sophisticated but non-academic audience, as well as seminars and clinics within our Humanities Center or our Career Center geared at helping graduate students use non-academic language to present their research or just engage in negotiations and whatnot that are critical to thinking about careers beyond the tenure track. So I've put up a few examples of each of these. For instance, the Berkeley D Lab, where Claudia is from, they offer a number, like a really incredible number of resources, clinics, workshops where graduate students can go learn Python from beginner to advanced and use it in their own research. Mentoring and teaching, we've recently developed a Berkeley B-Connect fellowship that gives graduate students a healthy stipend and a really manageable 20-student course load that's only 1 unit, and just asks graduate students to kind of cultivate their capacity to mentor undergraduates as opposed to teach them in a really intensive like lecture course structure. So I'm just trying to illustrate there's a huge number of resources in all these different categories, and you can find more information in the hot pink snapshot on each of your tables. And to try to quickly cast light upon like who's involved in this effort on campus, there's basically 3 types of entities that I've identified. One are kind of the grassroots student groups of graduate students that are trying to help themselves and their peers think about what they might do beyond become professors and cultivate their professional networks and the skills that they need in order to do that. The second, research centers. So the Townsend Humanities Center is creating a number of new resources this year and has kind of a number of people within it have demonstrated themselves to be kind of allies to graduate students that are looking at different futures. And then student services. So the Visiting Scholars and Postdoctoral Affairs Association at Berkeley, the Career Center, and a number of different offices within the graduate division. Those 3 entities have increasingly been working on their own, but also together to help create some type of infrastructure that's legible to graduate students that are trying to think about what they might do besides become faculty. So what do graduate students think of these? At the beginning of October, I sent out relentless emails to 1,367 graduate students in all of the social sciences and humanities on campus, aside from economics and demography. I finally got around 230 graduate student responses, and they, as you can see, there's a number of interesting breakdowns, but I think one of the more interesting ones is, or the more provocative ones, is that the majority of respondents are people that have passed their qualifying exams. So this decision is on the horizon for them. Echoing Meg's and Olivia's data, I'm sorry if it's a little bit unclear. Unfortunately, the vast majority of respondents were unfamiliar with any or all of these resources. So about 15% said that they weren't even aware that any of these opportunities were available to them. Another 44% said that they felt unfamiliar with the resources on the whole. And a smaller margin mentioned that they had felt familiar and that they had in fact made use of a number of them. So where are graduate students going for support if they're not using these various campus entities? One of the most striking takeaways from the survey that I did was just how, I want to say, alienated most graduate students feel from their departments. 55% reported that they felt they were not supported in their efforts to think about alternative careers. Only 14% did feel support from their department. That broader trend was more or less reflected on the campus level, although the skew wasn't quite so pronounced. But overall, most respondents are going to their friends and colleagues, both within and beyond the university, for support in thinking about alternative careers and what they might do. And in their open-ended responses, a lot of them mention this. The reason is because they are either afraid, at the most extreme end, of professor retaliation, or are just scared of a general stigma pronounced by the fact that, there's no alumni data available. There's a sense that there's two options available, either become a professor or become an adjunct, and very little information about what else you might do. So what do they want? As Meg mentioned, the majority want resources presented within their department, whether that be alumni panels or even better workshops curtailed to the skills that they've been developing in their doctoral programs. And in their open-ended responses, the rationale that was offered was not just that those career paths and those opportunities seemed more feasible to pursue, but also that many graduate students felt like that is what might change the dialogue around this. Once it's in their department, they're going to feel more comfortable pursuing what else is available to them. And also, you might see up here, a lot of what graduate students are saying they want are actually already available, the one-on-one career counseling sessions, the alumni panels, but either they're not aware that they exist or they're not pursuing it because of these kind of more psychological reasons. So that's Berkeley. I think we're all really excited to hear what you guys make of all this after lunch. So we invite you and encourage you to kind of talk about it amongst yourselves. And when we get back, we'll invite you to tell us what you make of all this and how we can respond. So lunch is just on the other side of the courtway here, and we'll all walk out together.
And we'll take 1 hour and be back at 1.
1 hour and be back at 1. Thanks.